If I could touch on the sad state of racial division for a minute. What conversations need to happen to change the climate of hatred, fear, and ignorance in our country?
I think the conversation has to start in the church, because, obviously, it's our responsibility to establish what the moral compass should be. And unfortunately, Sunday is still the most segregated day of the week. And that's not a reality that we all like to embrace. And I know that there's, people kill. The tendency is to rebut that with, well, that's a demographic issue, or, I don't know. People have just different arguments for it. But the bottom line is that is a sad reality. And until the church is willing to kind of have the hard discussions, I think the church deals with it in a very superficial way, which is why we don't get really far. I think that we're very defensive when it comes to these issues, these racial issues. I think that so that makes it difficult to kind of get any headway, because if racial reconciliation can't start with the church, the Bible says in Ephesians 2 that Jesus broke down the wall of hostility that existed between the Greeks and the Jews and the Samaritans. So there was a literal wall of hostility. Now it's both horizontal and vertical, right, in the context. Obviously, horizontally, he broke down the wall of division that stood between, of hostility that stood between us and himself. But secondarily, he broke down the wall of hostility that stood between races and ethnic groups, rather, that were at odds with one another. The greatest joy, one of the greatest things about the gospel is that it teaches us, there's this picture of God chasing down a bunch of people who want nothing to do with him, right? Which is really what's going on now. Like these racial tensions are, okay, one group doesn't want to have anything to do with another group. So it's the Christians there, and there's no, kind of transcendent, what's what I'm looking for? Kind of moral authority, for people to appeal to, if not. So if it doesn't start with the church, people are just looking within themselves, trying to find answers as to how to fix it, which is why on CNN, political analysts can just go on and on and on and on for days about what they think the solution to this problem is and get absolutely nowhere. Why? Because at the end of the day, this racial issue is a heart issue. And if the gospel of Christ is not applied to this issue, if what we see God doing in pursuing people that want nothing to do with him, if what we see God doing in breaking down walls, the wall of hostility that was built up in Babel, actually, because the Bible teaches us that prior to Babel, we didn't have these problems. Everybody spoke one language. It was fine. Everything was fine. Babel was the place where racial division actually started, and ethnic division actually started. When Jesus comes, his death on the cross breaks down that wall that was built in Babel. Mm-hmm. You feel me?
Yep.
Yeah. So I think that without this point of reference, this eternal, kind of point of reference, this eternal perspective, without an eternal lens through which we can kind of really begin to have the conversation and navigate through this, it's impossible for us to get anywhere. So I think it has to start with the church. I think the church has to sit down, blacks and whites, Asians and blacks, Africans and whites, Africans and blacks. Because the issue is, I'm going to just say this and be done, but the issue is really, I tell people all the time, the issue is really not racism. The issue, because if you get rid of racism, you still have more isms. The issue is really prejudice, right? So if you don't have racism, you have classism. Mm-hmm. You don't have classism, you have generationalism. Yeah. Right? Those exist because of a deeper heart issue. Right? So all of these conversations need to be, we need to be having the conversation surrounding prejudice in general. And if we can address the root of prejudice, which is pride, you know, whether it's ethnic pride or whatever, which is pride, arrogance, which is insecurity, fear. If we can address that stuff, then we can get somewhere in this discussion.
Wise words.
Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for touching on that.
Thank you.